A track there from The Undercurrents called Some Kind of Closure, and before that was The Impending Adorations, a track there called Advice to the Young at Heart. Time now on Kiwi is 12 minutes past 9.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Joining us in Melbourne City, of course, Janine Young. Good morning, Janine.
Good morning to you.
A couple of great stories today. First up, we're looking at climate change, but not how climate change will affect the Earth, but how specifically warming will affect humans.
Yeah, because it's all about us.
Yeah.
Forget the planet, forget about the animals, forget, carbon dioxide levels. No, it's all about us.
That's
and
right.
For this morning, it actually is. A really interesting study. A bunch of researchers at University of New South Wales in Sydney have been looking at what will happen to humans. We know that the average temperature across the planet is going to rise. Even if we cut our emissions tomorrow right down to almost nothing, there will still be a lag. You have the fact that the oceans are absorbing heat at the moment. There will eventually come a time when they actually start re-emitting it. There's a whole bunch of other things that means that it won't stop tomorrow if our carbon emissions do. And so they took the basic physics and thought, well, if the planet's going to get warmer, what's that going to do to the human body? Because we have a reasonably narrow range in which we can live. Our bodies can't stay above 35 degrees for extended periods of time, or frankly, we die. And that becomes a more pressing issue in hot and humid parts of the planet. When you think about it, there's more of those than they are the nice temperate climates. Like, for example, the one I live in. Yeah, it gets a bit warm sometimes, but it doesn't get humid. So around the tropics and the like, when you think about it, is also where a lot of people live. So, okay, say we do in fact have a massive temperature rise. What's going to happen to all these people? It appears that for every degree of average temperature across the planet, you're going to get an increase of what's known as the wet bulb temperature. So that's the temperature that a mercury thermometer would read if you stuck it inside a wet towel.
Okay.
I know it sounds really dumb, but it's measuring humidity as well as heat.
Yeah.
And if you've ever spent any time in a humid country, then you can't sweat and you can't cool down in the same way as you can do in a dry climate. Anyway, this wet bulb temperature for every degree of average temperature change is going to go up by 0.75. Now, in the tropics at the moment, it basically doesn't get above 31 degrees, this average temperature, because you have hot air rising, you generate thunderstorms. It generally cools things down reasonably quickly in the afternoon. And so at 31 degrees, believe me, it's unpleasant, but you can do it. Sit in front of a fan, you stay very still, you dunk yourself in water, you can do it. If it gets above 35 degrees for hours or days, then you're going to start seeing people die. And it's unfortunately that simple. And they're talking about, 3-degree changes, but across, a couple of centuries, it could go as high as 7 or perhaps even 12. And if it does get up to a 12-degree increase, then theoretically, half of the land that's currently inhabited on the planet will become uninhabitable. So that's the Amazon basin, that's India, parts of Africa, China, Australia. There's a whole bunch of different areas that will suddenly become uninhabitable. Southern parts of the United States, around Florida and the like. So there's some pretty scary stuff going on there.
Yeah, you can imagine we'd have to, I guess, develop spacesuits for everyone, to regulate body temperature if it went that extreme.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but that's probably not too far off the truth. However, the costs of that kind of thing are likely to become prohibitive. There are people that aren't going to be able to afford it. And unless the government suddenly decides that they do in fact want to stay in a particular city and they do want to pay for it and they do want, I think the more likely solution is that people will just move, which will then provide all sorts of issues around where they go and how defensive the people get where they're going. No one ever wants to have refugees. We see it very clearly. I know that in Australia we have regular discussions about both people and asylum seekers and every other derogatory name you can give them. And as soon as you start seeing other people coming in, and it could equally be sea level rises. We've had this conversation before as well. an eerie feeling of inevitability about what we're saying here. It's coming back to the fact that we have to reduce carbon emissions, and it has to be done soon, and it has to be done drastically. No matter how many different ways you look at the problem, that's what it seems to come back to.
Indeed it does, and it seems strange to go from a topic like that, which is obviously very important. The number one issue really in the world is climate change, onto something a bit more frivolous, but nevertheless important. Touchscreens, of course, are ever so popular at the moment. They're completely the rage, with Apple coming out with something new all the time, and all these other smaller devices that all other companies are bringing out with Android. But apparently there's an issue with the materials that make up touchscreens, and they're becoming more rare.
They were rare to start with, and that's the really interesting thing about it. Something called indium tin oxide is a byproduct of lead and zinc mining. Now, not every mine goes to the trouble of harvesting this byproduct, but for those that have, it's become quite lucrative, because this indium tin oxide, or ITO, is used in every touchscreen that's currently on the market. It's also in flat screen televisions, solar cells. It's all over the place. It's a $1.47 billion market, and they're anticipating that that's going to go up to a $2.5 billion market. So there's a lot of money to be made. But unfortunately, we're running out. They think that there's only 16,000 tonnes left. And based on current demand, that means that we'll be out, gone, nada, zip, no more by 2020. And when you think about it, that's not that far away. People love their touchscreens. I don't really get it. I don't really like it. It makes things messy, and I don't like that at all. It's just a personal thing. But other people love their touchscreens, and I know that.
Yeah.
Touchscreen televisions, there's iPads. Everybody knows the applications and the hardware that's out there. But if we can't find an alternative to this ITO, then that's going to be it. There will be no more touchscreens, because you have to have a compound or some kind of mix of something that has a really important mix of transparency. So you've got to be able to see through it, as well as being conductive to electricity. And an ITO has the perfect mix of both. They're now working across a number of labs across the world trying to find an alternative. They're looking at something like zinc oxide, but unfortunately it really doesn't do the job. Its conductivity is not that great, and the opacity is just non-existent, so that's useless. There's other options based on cadmium oxide. That's unfortunately prone to corrosion, which means you have to have a layer of ITO over top it. Now, it means that you're only using 20% of the ITO, but that's not a long-term solution either. Polymers, carbon nanomaterial, they don't have a solution at this point.
Crikey.
There are any number of labs that are trying, and I think that probably carbon nanomaterial, so graphene, is probably the best solution for the time being. But frankly, they don't have an answer. So if you like your touchscreens, be a bit gentle with them.
Yeah.
Try not to replace them too soon, because there might not be an alternative in 10 years' time.
And also, I guess recycling would become quite important with all this as well. And I'd imagine, wouldn't you say that if that material is becoming more scarce, rather than the price of these devices coming down, they may in fact go up?
The basic nature of a free market and economics. As soon as anything becomes more scarce, yes, it's going to get more expensive. Production is becoming, there's more of it, and it's becoming more efficient, which means that helps bring the price down. But yes, over time, it's very likely they will get more expensive, because the fundamental material that makes it work is getting more scarce. So basic laws of supply and demand.
Indeed. Janine Young, always a pleasure. Those stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine coming out next week, and of course on newscientist.com. And Janine, we'll see you same time next week. See ya.
See you later.
Track now from the Upper Hutt Posse. This here is called Mana Motohake. 21 minutes past 9. Kiwi.